This is a Q Media production.
In today's episode, I speak with Ian Robinson, a seasoned CIO and winner of the CIO of the Year award. Ian has led large-scale transformations across critical infrastructure businesses, including Endeavour Energy, Endeavour Energy, and Water New South Wales. He's now the CIO at Life Without Barriers, a human services not-for-profit, where he is working to enhance service delivery outcomes for vulnerable populations through technology solutions. Today, we talk about the link between the physical and the digital world, how to build a culture of innovation, and how to prioritise projects across stakeholders with vastly different objectives. Enjoy the episode. Ian, you are a CIO with years of experience across so many different sectors. And what we're looking at the moment is such fast-changing, evolving technology. How do you, as a CIO, create a strategy when the technology is shifting so quickly?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is the more things change, the more they stay the same. So developing IT strategy hasn't really changed in my time, and that is you're always trying to work out how to apply technology to a business problem, and you're starting with what's the business strategy and what could shift, what could the future be if we were to apply technology. And of course, those parameters, as we've evolved technology, whether it's IoT or great breakthroughs like mobile data, we've had to change the way we interact with technology. And I think that's the single biggest shift in the IT strategy now. We're able to make it a more pleasurable experience for end users to actually adopt and use and engage with technology, whereas before, green screens, swivel chairs, pretty hard work.
Now let's take a look back at your career. So you actually spent the first part of your career all in infrastructure, utilities, energy, water. So what drew you to that industry and what kept you there for so long?
Yeah, really, I never started in IT per se. I'm an engineer, electrical engineer, and my first job happened to be working on the railway, picking up cigarette butts. No, just kidding. Doing things related to communications, so a strand of electrical engineering. And then that evolved into what can you put at the end of the communications apart from people? And it became things that could monitor what's going on. So, for example, early arrangements in railway were weighing coal cars or looking for hot boxes like axles that would cause the train to derail. And that's just evolved into this nexus of what happens in the physical world links to what happens in the digital world, and then what we make as insights into how it can change the performance of the asset or the activity we're carrying out. So my career's had a really strong strand of engineering in the physical world but linked to the digital world.
So when we're looking at this critical infrastructure, we're looking at 100% uptime. I mean, this is really essential services, the ones that you've been working at. How do you actually balance getting this digital transformation and getting this physical and digital world together, but also while maintaining our operational 100% uptime?
Yeah, I think in the asset world, the challenge is always about how do you better maintain the asset, and to your point, how do you make sure it never goes offline, whether that's electricity or rail or water. And each of those, the more you can understand about what's going on inside the asset that you can't see, what's happening when you're not in the room with the asset, and how you can understand that and then make better decisions around next actions, digital is where that transformation comes into play. So in the past, we've had people who sat at dams, for example, 24/7, and they would walk up and down that dam every day, multiple times, and take visible measurements. Now we've got drones, now we've got measurement systems that allow those people to do that less frequently, so we can release people from mundane work and put them on higher value work, and that's always been the goal.
So if we have downtime, what do we do to address that? Because, I mean, I haven't worked in these critical infrastructure industries. I mean, it sounds like it would be pretty high impact.
Yeah, well, the first thing is be able to respond quickly. So two things come into mind when you talk about that. One is, what can I do preventatively that avoids assets failing? And often that is understanding the failure mode of the asset and then detecting that with leading indicators that tell you it's about to fail. And then you can do something to maintain it. Often we compensate by over-maintaining, and so the opportunity is often to make maintenance more efficient. That's the preventive side. And then when it does fail, you want to be able to respond to that really quickly and ideally have alternate pathways. So, a second line for electricity or a second pipeline or another way to access the water or the railway. And these then are fallback scenarios which you can enact almost immediately by just switching. So switching becomes really important. And then the third point is get to the site as quick as possible, know what the problem is and bring the right people, skills and tools along as well as equipment to replace the failed asset and get it up and running again as quick as possible. Because failovers only work for a certain amount of time and they're designed to just operate in it for a short period. Like when you get a flat tyre, you put the spare on, but it's not a full spare, so you don't want that to run forever.
So yeah, it sounds like it's not just technology and you need the people, all that working together to make it happen.
That's the key, right? The technology's never done in isolation of the people and the process. And those things are really key to link together. And that's why I think, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because people need to do their job and feel like they're in control and have the ability to make sure that they're doing their job well. Technology is just a tool for that, and the process enables them to do it well every time.
Let's dig into some of your experiences at Water New South Wales, because I understand you've done some pretty big transformative work over there. Share with us, a big program that you've run. Why did you do it? What were the objectives? Just tell us deep into it.
Yeah, when I joined Water New South Wales, it was a very new company. They had been formed out of 3 separate entities. And so it was a little bit initially about just bringing together 3 different work cultures, 3 different, as is often the case with acquisitions, 3 different base systems like ERP, finance, HR. So the first project was ERP, and we got that up and running. But then it became a lot more interesting around how do we optimise the way we run our water system and the way we interact with customers. And those 2 themes became sort of the operational program, if you like, that defined most of my time at that business. So on the operational side of the water, a lot of that's about understanding the situational awareness of what's happening in our rivers, in our dams, our waterways, both from the quality of the water and the quantity of water. So we went through in my time there, drought, then flood, and then drought and flood again. And those extremes that define sort of the events that the business operates in, as I said before, can put real stress on the asset and mean that it fails or doesn't meet the need of the people consuming the water to get the water. And so our overall objective with the operational side was to put data points around the network, measurement locations of water quality, water flow, and then bring that back to a centralised dashboard so that operators could make the right decision at the right time to keep the water flowing. And to try to avoid things like fish deaths, which I know we didn't, but sometimes the natural environment makes that impossible. And then when you've got no water, it's very hard to keep living organisms alive. So we're doing the best we can in a natural environment to optimise the way it runs. What we did to transform that was put in more measurement systems, bring back more data, control that data so that it's presented to someone in a dashboard, and then make that data work in a way that allows people to make a normalised decision using what is complex set of data and then operate the network to keep the water flowing. That's on the operational side. And then on the customer side, it was all about putting in a CRM, getting a single view of customer and making sure we can allow customers to speed up the way they transact, to make sure we fairly allocate water across all the stakeholders and give them visibility of what's going on with their water allocation throughout the year. So again, a lot about data, a lot about linking it to what have they consumed, what's the measurement of their consumption at a metre versus what they're allowed in their licence, and bringing again all that data together so the customer can make a better decision.
It's a fascinating thing, because I think probably most listeners don't understand, where all the water actually comes from. And we sit there and we turn on our tap and out comes a glass of water. So, I imagine then you had a huge, complex set of stakeholders. So, who were they and how did you manage them effectively?
Yeah, so if you're in Sydney, Sydney Water consumes our water from our dams around Sydney. And so every person in Sydney who has a shower or washes the dishes relies on the water coming from the bulk supply. Increasingly, we're looking at ways to recycle that and make it so that we don't rely completely on falling rain out of the sky and the rivers coming into our dams. We're looking at how do we reuse that same water that we consume. So that's one big challenge. Other consumers are farmers, small towns out in the regional areas who often put water back into the same river that they take it out of, having cleaned it, and then they give it to the next town who also cleans it and puts it back in. So it's this continuous flow. And each of those stakeholders represents their community, their local area, whether it's an irrigator trying to grow oranges or a community trying to keep the people in the residences running. All of those are key stakeholders. And obviously a lot of it's run by the government. They are responsible for the Murray-Darling Basin, how the water flows from Queensland to New South Wales to South Australia. We can't control the environment, but what we can do is make sure we really care for that precious resource and make sure we use it the best way we can and allocate it as fairly as we can.
So those stakeholders that are sitting out in regional Australia, farmers and other people who are using the water, how do you engage them? How do you communicate with them? How do you tell them we're going to be measuring our water differently or processing water differently? How do you make them want to come on that journey with them?
Yeah, well, often for organisations like Water New South Wales, we're an operator of the system and the government makes a lot of policy decisions. And that's true, I think, in all utility sectors where they're typically regulated, and an organisation like AEMO or the Australian Energy Regulator, or in the case of New South Wales, the Department of Planning and Environment, would make policy decisions around how to allocate, where to build infrastructure, and then use either taxpayers' money or customer money to build that infrastructure. And so policy is key, and obviously that's true about renewable energy or recycled water or managing the water environment. And then I think there's customer input around this is on their land. So often farmers have water rights as part of the land that they own, and therefore they feel that that's their water. What's running past their property in that river, they see as their water, and they get a slice of that water, but they also have an obligation to support the environment, to support First Nations people's rights to that water, and the whole community's ability to do recreation on that water. So government policy, and then the voice of the landowner and the consumer at the end of the day makes choices about what they pay for water and what they want that water quality to be. And in Australia, we really value obviously not getting sick from our water system, and so we really are willing to pay for high quality water.
Sounds like you do have a massive mix of stakeholders in that. I mean, so, engaging government and engaging the policies and all of that, as you said, there's three different groups all coming together. Where did you find the challenges within that, and how did you address them?
Yeah, I think the challenges with any stakeholder management is in, understanding yourself, understanding the position and the mindset of that particular stakeholder in the context of other stakeholders. So everyone's got their own personal intention and their own benefit that derive from the resource. And we need to understand that at the same time as understand the bigger ecosystem components of that, so we can put together a package that makes sense for everybody. And that's always difficult. I think often if you think about how do you as a new manager talk to an executive, it's putting yourself in the mindset of that executive. That's what makes the difference in being able to understand what's the broader vision, what's the bigger picture scenario, rather than just what's my particular element that I want to look at. And that's true, I think, in the water system broadly. I admit many people are in that business for 40 years because it's such a complex set of jurisdictional rules and regulations, and I'm not an expert on that. But what I would apply is what can make a difference? What's the impact that I personally can make with my contribution that will allow that there to be a shift in the way it operates? That means we need to understand stakeholders, but we need to understand in the context of what we're trying to achieve as well.
How did you inspire your team to come onto the journey with all this?
Well, I think if you're thinking about the IT team, as I guess a lot of CIOs focus on, it's always about lifting to think outside of the technology, to the application to the business and the softer skills around, as you just said, engaging stakeholders. Because if we can't bring people along on the journey and convince people through influence that our investment or our idea or our opportunity to change the game is material to them in their mindset, then we'll always fail. So it's never the quality of the technology argument. It's always the quality of the business change and the transformation that can occur if we make that journey. So for me, it was always trying to lift the thinking.
How did you do that?
What does this mean if we do it? Keep asking why questions. The 5 whys, I think, is one of the greatest techniques that has been around, because we often only go one layer and we say, why do I want to buy this thing? Oh, because, the other thing that we've got is not as good as this thing. But why is that even good to have it in the first place? And why did we first put it in, and what needs to change now that leads you to the next why? And when you go through those whys, you finally get to what's the essence of the investment and what is it that's actually going to change, and then what's the bigger picture implication of it. And the more we can think like executives, as I said before, the more we're able to get the kind of funding that we need to implement, the systems we need to implement. And then I think the other interesting thing that people really like is, I don't want to be stuck in my job. I want to be able to learn and grow and be able to be involved in big projects, not just maintain the system that I know. So give me opportunity, open up avenues for me, allow me to run on different projects, or give me a chance in another area so I can start expanding my knowledge. Because I think everyone wants to feel like they're growing, but at the same time wants to feel they're useful. And both those things require skill and variety in your career to open up those avenues.
Do you want your team to achieve peak performance? Well, then it's time for a change. Welcome to Leading Edge. We're not about traditional training. We're about transformation. Our outcomes-based leadership development programs focus on real results through behavior change and mindset shifts. We customize programs tailored to your team's needs, packed with cutting-edge content based on neuroscience and positive psychology. We run engaging workshops, personalized coaching sessions, and practical exercises to ensure an enriching experience for your team. How does it work? We dive deep. We start with surveys to identify strengths and gaps, which helps us to design a bespoke program designed for your team's success. With our approach, progress is inevitable. Our expertly facilitated workshops and coaching sessions ensure growth, and the results speak for themselves. Are you ready to take the leap? It's simple. First, choose your program. We have 5 to choose from, or you can customize a program to suit your team's needs. Second, pick your duration. We deliver 3, 6, or 12-month programs. This way, we can reinforce the learnings over time to drive real change. And finally, plan with us. Each team is different, so we make sure that what we're delivering is exactly what you need. Let's unlock your team's potential together. Contact us today, and let's start this journey to transform your team to achieve greatness. Since you left Water New South Wales, you've done a huge pivot and you have moved to an organisation called Life Without Barriers in a completely different industry. Tell us about the business. Tell us about what made you make that leap.
Yeah, so Life Without Barriers is a human services organisation focused on disability, child youth homelessness, aged care services in home. And I think they're, representative, I guess, of what's happening in the community, being, there's been a real shift by the Australian government to put the NDIS in and respect the fact that people with disability deserve a life that is mainstream in the community. And likewise, children who have broken families or whatever their challenges are deserve the right to be able to grow up in a family, whether that's a foster care family or a cared institution. The old days of asylums and hiding people away and putting people in orphanages are gone. So what Life Without Barriers tries to do is lift the quality of care for people who need that care. And whether that's because you're a kid or because you're disabled or because you're now not as mobile as you used to be when you were younger, we provide those services. We provide people who come into your life and provide those care services to you.
So what drew you to working in the industry?
Yeah, and really that is what drew me. I think that the importance of that, growing importance as well in Australia, the fact that the Western world has got this kind of baby boomer scenario, we're all getting older, and we're starting to realise the diversity and the inclusion need of people in our community. No longer can we hide people away. And I'm really gratified to be able to this stage of my career, turn my mind to something that has purpose, and I'm not saying utilities don't, because they do, but also which allows me to use all the experience I've gained over the years to apply it in a different sector. And that's the greatest thing about being in IT. You're not driven by only knowing about water or only knowing about electricity. You actually know about how to do business a bit better, how to run things more efficiently, how to think about customer experience in a different way, and to bring some of those experiences from other industries into the new industry. So my hope is I can apply my experience. That's the other reason. So purpose and experience are probably the major drivers.
So what are some of the technology changes that you're going to be bringing into this organisation?
Well, I think a lot of them are normal back office improvements. You know, how do we onboard a client, make it attractive for someone to look at LWB as a competitive business? How do we then build a service contract and make sure we meet our obligations under that service contract, and then bill the client, who often get government funding for that, so meet the compliance requirements for that, but also bill and get revenue for that. So a normal business service to cash process. I think the other side of it though, and that is important, because as a not-for-profit, we still need to be viable, we still need to be sustainable, and we don't get fundraise money typically. So we also need to meet the government's obligation to do this in a way that's efficient and effective for the taxpayer. But I think the other side of it, which I think is really interesting, is if we lean into that question of how do we make people's lives better, then you're starting to get into what happens inside the home and how does that person live their life. And if you're an aged person, how do you get access to the community when you're isolated? How do you communicate when you are unable to be mobile? How do you let people know that you're not feeling well, or that you're maybe about to fall over, or that you're not feeling stable on your feet? And these, I think, are assistive technologies that I'm really keen to work on with my knowledge around IoT and physical world measurement to get into how do we make people's lives better. So if you can imagine a blind person now with an iPhone can use the artificial intelligence on that phone to image generate something they're looking at, and it will tell them what they're looking at. Not only that, give them a recipe for how to cook the food that's in their fridge, or guide them to pull the right stuff out, and continually identify that even though they haven't got the eyes to see, or if you can't hear, or if you can't walk, or all those things. How do we bring the world to you? I think the metaverse is another great opportunity for people with an intellectual disability to experience the world. They may well have a barrier to be able to connect with people, but in the virtual world, they can. Their brain is perfect. Their mind is fantastic, but their ability to communicate may not be as strong as others. So all these great opportunities, I'm really excited by that.
I think that's great. And it's really changing quality of life for people who wouldn't have had that before. Do you see that there's any sort of digital divide, though, that you'll have to overcome? Because we talk about the metaverse and, there might be physical items that are needed. What kind of challenges do you see in that space?
I think there is a big digital divide. I mean, firstly, while I think the NDIA has said we're very willing to fund these types of devices, there's a lack of understanding in the community about how to apply it. Now, like today, I spoke with Apple about what I can do with my phone that I had no idea about accessibility, in terms of the capability. It's quite amazing that so many people don't understand the capabilities. I think we all know this about every application we use. There's about 1,000 features 99% of us never touch. And yet they were there for a specific purpose, which if you're trained and capable of using it, opens up a whole new world of opportunity for you. It's just we often don't need it in our own personal world, but other people may. There's a divide around, obviously, the access to the technology and the money to do it. So there's the, question of financial capability. And then I think the other side of that is just knowing what you can do it and make it easy to get access to it. So those two things need to be resolved, and both of them cause a divide. Neither of them are easy, but I think both of them require companies like LWB to be on the front line to present it, to have their people skilled in it, and to be able to offer that to our clients, even if they don't know or can't afford it.
So you have an entire team of care workers who are basically change agents hitting the entire country.
Exactly. And our job should be to make their job easy. It's a tough job.
Yeah.
It's a, heavy lifting, lots of work, not a hugely paid job. But at the same time, they are every day focused on the outcome for their client and improving their lives. And so they've got the mentality. It's just how do we make it easier for them to do that job?
Now, we've just talked about two very different industries. We talked about utilities and infrastructure, critical services, and then we've talked about human services. What kind of comparison can you make? Is there anything that's similar, anything that's different?
Yeah, if you think about the typical digital transformation, it's often around productivity. And I think from that point of view, so many similarities. We often spend our lives doing data duplications and re-entering things and doing manual work because we want to check things and we're compliance Nazis. And we don't make it easy for our staff because our technology is built in silos and developed over long time periods with legacy here that doesn't talk to new stuff there, and the architecture is constantly in this technical debt. And so I think all of that applies in every sector from my experience. And I think there's lots that therefore you can bring as parallels across. Back office, absolutely huge parallels. I think the front office idea of how do we transform the business model, that's much more industry centric. And the skill there is to really understand your industry and then how you can apply technology solutions. And that takes some period of immersion for people. But there are people in each business who really deeply understand opportunity. It's just need the ability to unleash it. And what CIOs, I think, bring is that ability to connect dollars to people, to technology, and bring those things together and through governance manage delivery of that.
So as a CIO, and we are leading change, how do we look at and align the needs of all of our stakeholders and all of our customers and actually bring all that together? Because often they have conflicting views or conflicting priorities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, there's this need we often talk about objective criteria for prioritisation, and all of that goes out the window as soon as someone gets emotional about their little thing. And we have to manage through that. I've often heard it said, transformation's a bit like eating kale. You sort of need to do it for your health, but it's really hard to keep doing it every day. And so you need to throw some chocolate in there amongst it all. And therefore it's always finding the balance between something that makes people want to come along, as well as thinking about the bigger long-term objective of changing the way the business works. And that always takes time and it's hard work and needs to have a lot of dependencies and thinking about the sequence of the initiatives that work towards that while keeping the architecture hairball in your mind. So those things are hard, but giving people something to hang on to, something that makes their life have a bit of joy, is something I often talk about in my discussions with executives around transformation and how we make people want to feel like it's working for them. Often in IT we get all caught up in the big picture and the architecture when really it's experience. It's people's experience with technology that makes them want to use it and do more of it. So balance is everything.
So you're talking about engaging with your executives. Now, as a CIO, you're really a service provider and you've got all of the different business units who all have different priorities. And you mentioned how to prioritize. When you have all of these different people asking for different things, how do you actually approach this prioritization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the executive as a whole, their job is to operate as the top team. And I think often, we often hear about this Lencioni concept of first team. And that means what team can make the biggest impact on the organisation. And it's not any individual line of business and their teams, but it's the whole business making the right decision for the organisation. And sometimes you have to put aside your personal bias and your preference to accept that there's a logic for the organisational benefit that the whole executive team needs to lean into. And so the CIO's job is to put those contrasts to the executive in a way that allows them to make that decision. If we put more into aged care, we can grow the business this way. And I'm not necessarily the expert in that. So I'm working with the aged care executive to put that business case together, while at the same time working with disability to say, yes, but we can take, 20 million out of our business if we improve productivity. That would make our bottom line look so much better. how do we compare those two options? Well, it comes down to value proposition, where is the business's strategic focus, and trying to bring all those things together in an executive conversation that says, let's do disability and aged care or one before the other, and make sure we disperse the money in the right way. There's no perfect answer. Objectively, we'd love to be able to say MPV, let's go with that, or no risk, or let's make sure we're 100% compliant. All of those things are factors, but I've never seen an objective prioritisation criteria just be a ticker box exercise. It's always conversation and nuance.
So if we're looking at an organisation and we want to start putting in all sorts of different changes, I suppose a lot of organisations are really looking at a model of continuous improvement. And that can be a difficult culture to implement, particularly in some organisations where they might not be thinking quite so forward. How have you implemented cultures of innovation and creative thinking?
Yeah, look, it's one of the biggest challenges. I think continuous improvement is a more natural space because we're ultimately only able to do things incrementally. And so I think the big shift in IT has been this move from project to product, and product means continuity, and continuity means keep doing the next best thing and just get the factory to push it through. And that is very aligned to the Kanban concept and continuous improvement. Innovation, though, requires a really different way of thinking, and creativity likewise. So how do you bring design thinking into the mix? How do you make people think like Amazon or Google? And it's not the natural space in my experience for utilities. And I haven't seen it, even though there are very creative people in both these industries, in human services as well. It's not the natural space to be able to get in and say, I can see how this innovation will make a shift. But what I can see is people doing experiments all the time, people doing pilots, and often it's not IT doing that. It's line of business people who can just now access cloud-based SaaS products. And more with Gen AI and that sort of stuff, it's accessible to anyone. And they're bringing that with a use case into the conversation and starting to build a set of people who support it around them. Now, it's not as structured maybe as what Amazon does with start with a press release and then work backwards. But I think there's huge opportunity in businesses if we listen. And I would say innovation comes from listening and engagement and bringing the board into that conversation because they have contacts outside the organisation, particularly in a not-for-profit where we might be able to get grants or research funding from people who are really interested in changing the game. Likewise in electricity with climate change advocates and that sort of stuff. Those people can come together and really drive innovation. And I think it's about broadening your mind to the ecosystem, listen to what people say and then try and filter that for the best next opportunity.
I'm guessing your boards are all talking about automation. I know you are doing some of that already and bringing AI into the mix. How do you balance actually working with the board to enable that? Because I'm pretty sure they're going to be asking you about what's your strategy and then actually understanding the practical implications, choosing the use cases and actually being able to move forward with that space of tech.
The great thing about boards in my mind is they are not immersed in the day-to-day running of the business. So by definition, they've brought broad experience from outside. Whereas I think inside, management's often driven by, I need to make a proposal to board. So I've got to build the case, make sure all the arguments are succinct and tight, and then present it to the board for approval. But by engaging the board, you're coming from a different dimension, which is rather than me as management sharing something with you, how about you bring your experience to me and we listen? And so I think that's the way, there's a two-way conversation here. There's obviously a need to disperse the company's money in a rational way, present to the board, make sure that's aligned to the company's strategy because they're responsible for that. And they're also on the other side responsible for making sure we operate within a risk appetite. And both those things are things that we try and balance when we're presenting proposals. And I continue to think that's going to be an important role for management. But the other side is, what have you heard from outside? Who do you know that can bring something different to the organisation? And I think at LWB there's a real appetite to bring that conversation to the front.
When we talk about team building, how can we make some highly efficient teams and people who work together? I know sometimes you have organizations, as you said, people work there for 40 years, right? But we need to have some real effectiveness built into the team. How do we balance that?
Building high-performing teams is a constant challenge. I mean, first of all, as a leader, there's this vulnerability about feeling completely inadequate to be able to actually work with the team in a way that motivates them to want to perform, motivates them to make them feel like what they're offering is value, but also that there's a pathway to a future for them, and also motivates them to deal with all the stuff that needs to be dealt with day to day. And all those things, again, kind of present you with the challenge of how do you have that conversation with people meaningfully. But I think two things are really important. One is the ways of working, so the operating model, which goes to how do I know what guardrails I'm working in? How do I know how to get things done effectively when, I'm stepping outside those guardrails? How much flex will the organisation give me so I can still do what I need to do, but also be able to operate so that I can be effective? Because often people struggle with the bureaucracies of large organisations and get caught up in the rules, and they interpret them and then go and get a ruling from someone, and it's always complex and difficult to navigate. So simplifying that and making it really clear, here's how we will repeat the process every time to get work done, is a really effective way to make people feel motivated. And then I think the other thing is make sure we've got people aligned in these product-like teams working closely with business so there's never a disconnect between them. Because often what happens is everyone works in silos, and technology is famous for this. We go and say, no, you can't go and do that. And then the business goes and do it, and then we throw rocks at each other about shadow IT and how IT never helps business. So breaking down that barrier so that we're actually all working together, and IT is not just seen as a support, but actually as part of the business and business part of IT, then I think that's the other magic formula that allows people to work well together.
Have you had specific things that have really worked about breaking down those barriers and bringing people together?
First of all, often what happens is we still operate in fences, so write me requirements business, throw them over the fence, our BA will help you and they'll review them, and then we'll review them with the technology solution, we'll throw that back to you. Increasingly, I think this idea of hybrid teams is really coming to the fore, where no longer it's a divide. This is one team being operated by the executive of the business generally, with the CIO making sure we're facilitating the engagement of those people, so that the CIO is not seen as the leader, the CIO is seen as the facilitator, and the business is leading the IT people as well as the business people. And those people then feel there's a seamless relationship between them. And I've been able to do that a couple of times. I would not say I've done that universally in every business, or that I've been able to just pick up in LWB and say, look at that, it's so easy. It takes hard effort, and it takes credibility and, over time, believability to know that there's trust and that relationship actually can be seamless. So I'm still working on it, but I think the key ingredients are allocate a group of people to a line of business. That's really key. And likewise, from the line of business, allocate people to work with IT, and that group can form a team that then represents the broader aspects of both organisations.
That's a really great segue into my final question, which is, if you're going to speak to a business leader who has been told that they need to lead change and they've just been given a huge project, what are the tips that you'd give them on how to actually do that effectively?
I think one thing is always keep your eye on the benefits. What are you trying? What's the objective? What's the North Star? And so I always start my transformation projects with that discussion. And often I think I've failed in the past where I've come up with that myself and said, I reckon you guys could have this objective. And they go, yeah, that's kind of right, but you don't really understand, Ian. And so them owning that and believing it, I think, is a really important first step. And then understanding all the layers below that go into that. So what are the dependencies that will allow me to achieve this 20% reduction in my costs, or grow my business by 20% into a new market? Those objectives might be clear at the North Star level, but what are the elements of that? How's that plan going to be implemented? And what's the actual technology dependencies that we need to lean into to work together on that? Because to reduce cost is going to require people, process and technology, again, to work together. And I think often my job is to try and help the business leader see how those things link together.
That's great. I really appreciate this conversation. I learned a lot. Ian, if our listeners want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
At the pub.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we head off there now?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show.
See you later.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.